The sun hung low in the sky, draping the town in a wash of amber and gold, turning every splintered board and rusted nail into something sacred, something touched by the quiet hand of time. Dust danced in lazy swirls along the empty street, carrying the scent of dry earth, horse sweat, and the faint smoke of yesterday's fires. The town had a rhythm all its own, the creak of shutters, the far-off whinny of a horse, the soft murmurs of life that insisted on going forward even when the world seemed indifferent. She walked with a careful steadiness, a small basket clutched to her side, fingers brushing against the woven edges as if the very texture of it could anchor her against the wind and the weight of the world. Her boots, worn and dust-stained, carried her with a dignity that seemed to whisper, even when the world shouted otherwise. She was a quiet flame, not a roar, and in that silence there was a kind of stubborn grace. The marketplace buzzed with low conversation. A woman traded eggs for flour, a boy chased a rolling hoop across the dirt, and somewhere a dog barked at shadows. She stepped into the shop, the wooden door groaning in protest, announcing her arrival to a man who had yet to understand the weight of hearts he didn't feel. The shopkeeper looked her over with a glance that clipped like wind against bare skin, measuring, judging, assigning value as if it were all visible on the threadbare fabric of her clothes. His lips twisted in a half-smile, half-sneer, and the words that followed slipped from him with the ease of water spilling over a ledge, sharp and cold. "You can't even afford a decent loaf, can you? Such a shame to see someone try so hard and still fall short." She said nothing, her lips pressed into a thin line, eyes calm, though inside, a quiet storm began to stir. She had faced this kind of disdain before. She had learned to carry it without breaking, to hold her dignity as one might cradle a fragile bird that would otherwise shatter beneath the rough hands of the world. From across the street, leaning against the rail of the water trough, he watched. The cowboy, silent and still, his hat casting shadow across eyes that had seen more than most were willing to carry. His hands rested lightly on the saddle horn, a stance that betrayed neither impatience nor interference. He noticed the slight tremor in her fingers, the way she squared her shoulders after the sting of humiliation, and the slow, deliberate way she picked up a coin to hand over. The shopkeeper's words continued, each one a pebble thrown into the pond of her composure. She felt the eyes of others, some curious, some sympathetic, and still she remained a silhouette of quiet strength, a figure that refused to shrink. And he, the cowboy, watched, not with desire, not with judgment, but with the kind of attention that is rare in a world so eager to look away. He saw her as she truly was, not broken, not diminished, but brave, a soul standing in the open sun with nothing but her dignity and a basket of modest goods. Outside, the wind carried the low creak of a sign swinging in the heat, the distant chime of the church bell, and the soft shuffle of boots on dirt. He felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest, a careful, steady recognition. Some moments demand silence, he thought, and this was one of them. Some courage is not loud. It is quiet. She handed over her coin, her movements precise, her gaze forward. The shopkeeper smirked and turned to attend another customer, oblivious to the weight of what had passed, unaware that in a corner of the street, a pair of eyes had witnessed her courage in its rawest form. The wind shifted, carrying a stray tumbleweed that bumped against her boots, and she moved out into the sunlight again. Dust rose behind her like a halo, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed that the town itself had paused to honor her passage. He mounted his horse a little further down the street, pulling the brim of his hat lower over his eyes. There was no hurry in his movements, no claim or statement. Only the quiet decision to watch, to wait, to see what kind of life would bloom from the soil that had tried to keep her down. And the town went on. Doors opened and closed, voices rose and fell, and the sun continued its slow descent toward the horizon. But something had shifted in the air, subtle as the whisper of a prairie wind, imperceptible to most, undeniable to those who looked closely enough. She walked past him without knowing he was there, a solitary figure against the gold light, carrying her basket and her pride as if they were one. And he, the lonely cowboy, watched, and in that watching, a story began, one that would not hurry, one that would not shout, but one that would unfold in the quiet, deliberate rhythm of hearts meeting when the world is too impatient. The town had begun to fold itself into evening. The sun's gold had softened into a honeyed amber, and shadows stretched long across the streets, curling around the edges of buildings like fingers brushing against worn wood. The market stalls were quieter now, the chatter fading into a soft hum that mingled with the creak of swinging doors and the occasional bark of a dog claiming its territory. She walked on, her basket light now, but her heart carrying the invisible weight of humiliation. Each step was deliberate, a rhythm meant to remind herself that she still had a place in the world, that she could move through its cruelty without losing herself. The dust rose in soft clouds around her boots, drifting like memory, and she pulled her shawl tighter, not against cold, but against the lingering sting of judgment. From across the street, he followed at a careful distance. The cowboy's horse was patient, its breath slow and steady, matching the rhythm of his own heartbeat. He did not approach yet, did not intrude, but his gaze never wavered. There was a subtle poetry to his watching, a quiet acknowledgement that courage, when it is silent, is more profound than any roar. She paused by a wooden fence, leaning slightly as she adjusted the strap of her basket. Her fingers moved over the worn weave with familiarity, almost reverence. A small boy ran past, laughing as he kicked up dust, and she offered him a soft smile, the kind that asked nothing in return. It was a gesture so small, yet it carried the weight of all her quiet kindness, unnoticed by most, seen only by the one who had learned to truly look. The cowboy noticed the details she did not realize she revealed. The careful way she avoided stepping in the soft mud, the gentle tilt of her head as she watched the horizon, the faint tremor in her hands that she smoothed away before anyone could see. He began to understand that her strength was not loud, that her bravery was threaded through the mundane, woven into every choice and every gesture. Night settled gradually, pulling a violet curtain across the sky, the first stars blinking awake like shy witnesses to the world. She moved toward the outskirts of town, past shuttered windows and silent saloons, where the smell of wood smoke drifted from a chimney and the occasional lantern flickered in the growing dusk. The quiet wrapped around her like a soft cloak, and for a moment she allowed herself to breathe freely, to feel the pulse of her own heart without interference. Memories drifted in her mind like autumn leaves caught on the wind. The early mornings she spent tending to her siblings, the gardens she coaxed life from despite parched soil, the small victories that no one would ever applaud. Each recollection was stitched with effort and resilience, a tapestry of life that the world had tried to ignore. He saw it all, the grace, the persistence, the subtle elegance of someone surviving without surrendering. And he felt for the first time in a long while a quiet ache in his chest. Not longing, not desire, but recognition. Recognition that some souls, once seen, cannot be forgotten. A kind neighbor passed by, nodding gently, and a young street urchin peeked from behind a corner, eyes wide with tentative trust. She offered a word, a gesture, a smile. Gestures that seemed insignificant but carried weight like stones thrown into a river. And in each small act, she revealed herself, brave, patient, unseen in her full glory by most, yet radiant to those who chose to look. The cowboy's mind wandered to his own days on the road. Long rides through barren lands, nights spent alone beneath the sky, carrying memories too heavy to speak aloud. He had learned that human connection is rare and that kindness is rarer still. And now, standing in the quiet glow of evening, he felt a rare certainty. This woman, walking through the dust and shadow, carried a light he had long thought impossible to find. A breeze stirred, lifting strands of her hair across her face, and she brushed them away, unaware of his gaze, tracing the motion with gentle admiration. She did not know he had followed her, that his presence lingered like the soft echo of wind through the canyons. And he did not intrude, did not speak, for some things must unfold in their own rhythm, like water carving canyons over centuries. She paused once more, looking toward the horizon where the last golden streak of sun kissed the distant hills. There was a quiet sadness in her eyes, a reflection of the world's hardness, but also an unspoken promise that she would endure, that she would rise again with each day, that her heart would remain whole despite the sting of judgment. The cowboy adjusted his hat, tipping it slightly against the falling night, and in that small motion he felt a kinship he had rarely known. Not with her, exactly, not yet, but with the truth of her existence. That courage can be quiet, that dignity can withstand mockery, that someone's worth is not measured by the coins in their pocket or the eyes of the indifferent. He remained there as she disappeared into the shadows of the edge of town, the lantern light glimmering off the corners of buildings, casting long silhouettes that seemed to follow her. And he knew that he would follow too, not to save, not to claim, but to witness. To bear witness to a soul navigating the hardships of life with a grace that few recognized, but that he, at least, would never forget. And for the first time in many nights, he felt a quiet hope stir, like embers glowing beneath the ashes. Perhaps the world would not always be cruel. Perhaps some hearts could meet, not in haste, not in spectacle, but slowly, quietly, in the gentle rhythm of understanding. The wind carried a soft whisper through the streets, mingling with the fading light, as if the town itself held its breath, waiting for what might come next. And somewhere beyond the hills, under the growing canopy of stars, the story began to breathe, fragile, delicate, yet unyielding. Night had settled fully over the town, painting the streets in soft indigo, the buildings outlined in the silver gleam of stars. Lanterns flickered in windows, spilling warm pools of light onto the worn boards, and the air smelled of dry earth and with smoke, of wind carrying promises the town could not yet hear. The quiet was almost sacred, the kind of silence that allows hearts to speak in ways words cannot. She moved carefully along the outskirts of town, where the boardwalks ended and the earth opened to the soft sway of prairie grass. Her basket now rested on the ground beside her small home, but her hands did not drop, lingering on the wood as if holding on to something more than a mere piece of furniture. Perhaps the invisible threads of resilience she had spun over years of hardship. A gentle tap at the edge of her doorstep startled her at first, and then curiosity nudged her forward. There, lying atop a small scrap of cloth, was a loaf of bread, wrapped carefully, a hand-stitched handkerchief beside it. No note, no name, only the quiet intention of someone who had watched and understood without seeking credit or recognition. She picked up the gifts, turning them over in her hands. The bread smelled of warmth and grain, the handkerchief soft and worn in the careful way only human hands could make it. And in that small act, she felt a flutter of something rare, the kind of recognition that does not mock, that does not pity, that simply sees. From the shadow of a nearby tree, he watched, hidden but close, his eyes soft, unjudging. He did not move forward, did not speak, allowing the moment to belong entirely to her, because some gestures are meant to bloom quietly before words are spoken. Days passed in the same gentle rhythm. They began to encounter one another in small, accidental ways. A shared path along the dusty trail outside town, a brush of hands while reaching for water at the trough. Their exchanges were minimal, almost imperceptible to any outsider, yet weighted with meaning. Words were few, but attention was abundant, and in the stillness between sentences, something tender began to take root. She noticed how he carried himself, deliberately, without rush, as if the world could wait. How he listened, not to reply, but to understand. He noticed her, not for beauty or charm, but for the way her courage shaped her movements, for the way her eyes held the quiet wisdom of someone who had learned to survive without surrendering. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, painting the sky in shades of rose and violet, their paths crossed once again. The cowboy dismounted and approached with a careful, respectful distance, speaking softly, in the rhythm of the wind and the crickets, his voice carrying neither judgment nor expectation. "I saw what happened in town," he said simply, letting the words hang without accusation or pretense. "I wanted you to know that someone saw." She did not reply immediately, her hands gripping the edges of her basket, eyes tracing the horizon. But the weight of his attention, gentle and unwavering, settled over her like a protective cloak. In the quiet, she felt seen, truly seen, and the recognition sparked something inside her that had long been dormant. The fragile, hesitant bloom of trust. They spoke little, yet in every gesture, in every silent glance, the story of two souls meeting began to unfold. She began to share moments of her life, not in grand declarations, but in quiet revelations. The early mornings tending her siblings, the work that left her hands rough but her heart soft, the small joys hidden in the everyday. And he, in turn, revealed fragments of his world. The lonely miles on horseback, the nights under endless skies, the search for a place that felt like home. Not a home built of walls, but of understanding, of shared quiet and gentle respect. Side characters observed from afar. Neighbors, the street urchin she had befriended, noting a subtle shift in her demeanor. Her shoulders, once heavy with the unspoken weight of judgment, had begun to ease. Her gaze, once cautious and measured, held a softness, a light that had not been there before. The town, as if sensing the change, seemed to exhale with them. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust, the soft chime of a distant bell harmonizing with the rhythm of their lives. And in that shared stillness, they discovered a rare truth. That connection does not always arrive in grand gestures or fiery declarations. Sometimes it comes quietly, in recognition, in the patience to wait, in the courage to see without needing to change. By nightfall, they found themselves walking together along the edge of the prairie, horse hooves kicking up soft clouds of dust behind them. There was no rush, no expectation, only the gentle unfolding of trust. Occasionally, their hands brushed, a fleeting contact that carried the weight of unspoken understanding. It was not yet love, not yet the fervent rush of passion, but something steadier, more enduring, the kind of bond that could weather the harshest winds without breaking. And in that quiet rhythm, the story deepened, planting seeds that would soon bloom in the face of challenge and confrontation. They were two souls who had found recognition in one another, two hearts learning to trust without hurry, two lives weaving together in subtle, almost invisible threads. Above them, the stars twinkled, scattered across the indigo sky like scattered promises, and the wind whispered through the grass, carrying a quiet anticipation. For the first time, she felt a sense of calm, a sense that perhaps, even in this hard, sun-baked town, the world could hold tenderness. And he, riding just a step behind, felt the same quiet assurance. The story of humiliation, of loneliness, of struggle, had not yet ended, but its sharp edges were softening. And in that softening, in the recognition of bravery and kindness, they began to write a new chapter together, one measured not in words, but in gentle understanding and the slow, deliberate bloom of human connection. The evening had deepened into night, the sky a velvet canvas dotted with pale, distant stars. Lanterns glimmered softly along the boardwalks, casting golden pools of light that trembled with the wind. The town seemed to hold its breath, as if even the wooden walls and dust-covered streets knew something had shifted, that a story was reaching its turning point. She walked toward the shop once more, not for coin or favor, but because the weight of injustice lingered too long on her shoulders. The basket in her hands was small, yet heavy with dignity, a quiet assertion that she would not bend to mockery again. The hum of the town was low and unobtrusive, townsfolk lingering behind curtained windows, watching, waiting, sensing the quiet storm in the air. The shopkeeper stood behind his counter, as he always did, the corners of his mouth lifted in a sneer meant to belittle. But tonight, there was a subtle tension in his stance, as if he too sensed the inevitability of what was coming. He did not yet know that the world would not always bow to his sharp tongue. She stepped inside. Her eyes met his with calm precision. Her voice, soft but deliberate, carried across the room. "I'm not here for coin. I'm here to remind you. Respect is earned, not assumed." Her words were quiet, yet they struck harder than any shout. The room seemed to still around them, the air thick with the weight of truth. The shopkeeper opened his mouth, but found it difficult to speak against the resolve in her eyes, against the dignity she carried as naturally as breathing. Outside, the cowboy leaned against the post of a lantern, his hat tipped low, eyes fixed on her with steady admiration. He said nothing, for some triumphs are best witnessed, not spoken into existence. Yet his presence was a shield, a quiet force that seemed to lend her courage without lifting a finger. The townsfolk, long used to the spectacle of humiliation, began to murmur. Some shifted in their seats, others peeked from behind shutters, all sensing the reversal of fortune, the quiet assertion of integrity over arrogance. The shopkeeper's sneer faltered, replaced by a twitch of unease, a realization that the world does not always honor cruelty. She turned, her basket held lightly, and met the cowboy's gaze. In that moment, the silent understanding they had cultivated over weeks became tangible. No words were necessary. A brush of hands, almost accidental, almost shy, carried the weight of recognition, of respect, of a bond forged in quiet courage rather than loud declarations. He stepped forward then, just slightly, enough to be beside her as they faced the shopkeeper together. There was no demand, no threat, only a presence that spoke louder than words, a promise of support, a recognition of bravery. The man behind the counter swallowed, suddenly aware that he had underestimated the quiet strength of a woman who had endured far more than he could ever comprehend. She walked past him, dignity intact, and the cowboy followed, silent but steadfast, like a shadow that finally feels like home. The town seemed to exhale, the tension dissolving into the soft sigh of night. And for the first time in a long while, the streets felt alive with more than dust and heat. They carried possibility, respect, and a fragile, tender hope. Later, they rode together along the prairie path, the horses' hooves stirring the dust into the soft glow of lantern light from the town behind. The wind carried a gentle whisper, mingling with the distant call of night birds and the rustle of grass. Words were few, but their presence spoke volumes, of trust, of shared understanding, of a world where kindness was not weakness, and courage was not measured in loud triumphs. She glanced at him, a small, tentative smile brushing her lips. It was not the heady bloom of romance, but something steadier, deeper, the quiet knowledge that someone finally saw her, fully and without condition. He met her gaze, tipping his hat slightly, the faintest acknowledgement of a promise kept. No grand speeches, no hurried confessions. Only the recognition that hearts, when patient, can find one another even in the dust and silence of a sun-beaten town. They paused by a creek that reflected the moon like shattered silver. The night was still, the world holding its breath, and she felt the echo of every humiliation, every quiet act of endurance, dissolve into the gentle balm of being understood. The cowboy's hand brushed hers once more, a fleeting contact that said everything without words. Somewhere beyond the hills, the town slept, and the stars witnessed a story of quiet triumph, of courage that whispered instead of shouted, of dignity that endured, and of a bond that began in the soft, deliberate rhythm of seeing and being seen. The shopkeeper would speak less harshly in the days to come. He would remember the woman who refused to be diminished, and perhaps, in some corner of his conscience, learn the weight of kindness. The townsfolk, those who noticed and those who did not, would carry forward the memory of quiet courage, like seeds waiting for rain. And they, she, and the cowboy would continue their journey, not in haste, not in spectacle, but in the patient unfolding of understanding, the slow bloom of something enduring, something rare. They had discovered a universal truth, that courage is not always loud, that love does not always shout, and that some bonds are forged in silence and kindness, becoming unbreakable in ways the world rarely sees. The night held them gently, the prairie stretching endlessly ahead, dust and wind blending with the quiet rhythm of hearts aligned. And as the moon rose higher, painting silver lines across the land, the story came to a close, not with fireworks, not with drama, but with the profound, steady beat of human truth. And to those who listen to such stories, remember, courage may whisper, but it can move mountains. Kindness may be quiet, but it changes lives. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of your own world, someone sees you. From where are you watching this story unfold? Like, comment, and share your thoughts. Carry the quiet courage forward wherever you may roam.